She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't even be alive. The guards were too busy dealing with the chaos beyond the walls to notice the small, broken Omega making her way toward the grand marble steps of the Alpha King's palace. Every step felt like a battle, her legs weak from exhaustion, her wolf spirit too faint to offer her strength. But she had to reach him. Her lips trembled as she looked up at the towering palace, its golden spires glinting under flashes of lightning. Behind those walls lived the man who had unknowingly given her both, the greatest blessing and the most dangerous curse of her life. The Alpha King. Lucian Blackthorn, powerful, ruthless, feared by all. And father to the child she carried. Aria's heart pounded as she leaned against the cold stone wall, closing her eyes for a moment. She could still remember that night, the one that had changed everything, the heat in his gaze when he looked at her, the way his touch had burned through her very soul. It had been one night. Just one night under the blood moon. And now, she was carrying his heir. A low growl of thunder rolled across the sky, mingling with the distant howls of rival packs in the forest beyond. War was coming, and if anyone learned the truth before she reached him, both she and the child growing inside her would be slaughtered before the sun rose. She had no choice. The Alpha King had to know. Lightning cracked across the sky again, illuminating the palace gates behind her, where shadows moved. She wasn't alone. Her blood turned to ice. They had found her. Chapter 1. The night that changed everything. The royal ball had always been a spectacle of power. That evening, the grand ballroom glittered like 1,000 captured stars. Golden chandeliers bathed the palace in warm light, and polished marble floors reflected the swirl of gowns and capes as nobles danced in perfect synchrony. The air smelled of perfume and wine, thick with chatter, ambition, and barely concealed rivalries. But none of it belonged to Aria. She stood at the edge of the room, her simple servant's dress a sharp contrast to the silks and velvets surrounding her. With trembling hands, she poured wine into crystal goblets, her gaze fixed on the floor as she moved among the powerful wolves of the realm. She was nothing here, just a weak, voiceless Omega the world barely noticed. Or so she thought. Across the hall, on the raised throne-like seat overlooking the festivities, sat the Alpha King. Lucian Blackthorn. His very presence commanded the room. Broad shoulders encased in black and gold, dark hair brushing the collar of his ceremonial coat, and those infamous golden eyes, cold as molten fire, sweeping over his subjects like a predator surveying prey. Whispers followed him wherever he went, ruthless, unyielding, unmated, a king whose word was law, whose strength kept the packs united, and whose temper could tear kingdoms apart. Aria had never dared look at him for more than a heartbeat. Wolves like him didn't notice ones like her. She was used to fading into the background, used to being overlooked. It was safer that way. But fate had other plans that night. The trouble began when Beta Dorian, one of the king's most trusted soldiers, stumbled toward her with the stench of wine heavy on his breath. "Hey, little Omega," he slurred, blocking her path as she tried to refill the noble's glasses. His smirk made her stomach twist. "You've been avoiding me all night." Aria froze, clutching the wine tray tighter. I wasn't." He leaned closer, voice dropping to a mockery of a whisper. "Maybe I like my Omegas shy. Makes breaking them in more fun." Her heart pounded. She stepped back, but his hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. The crystal goblets rattled on the tray, and then everything happened at once. A low, menacing growl cut through the music. Every wolf in the room stilled. The Beta paled, releasing her wrist instantly as the crowd parted like waves before a storm. Lucian was on his feet. The Alpha King moved with the lethal grace of a predator, each step echoing across the silent ballroom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Power radiated from him like heat, setting every nerve in Aria's body alight. When his golden eyes locked on hers, she forgot how to breathe. "Did he hurt you?" His voice was low, dangerous, meant for her alone. Aria shook her head quickly, terrified to speak, terrified to move under the weight of his gaze. Lucian turned his attention to the Beta, who now stood trembling. Out, the king said, his tone like a blade's edge. The soldier didn't wait to be told twice. The music started again, as if nothing had happened, but Aria couldn't stop trembling. When Lucian turned back to her, she braced herself for anger, for punishment. Because alphas like him didn't step in for omegas like her, but instead, he did something no one expected. He reached out and gently took the tray from her shaking hands. "You're hurt," he said softly, his eyes flicking to the angry red mark on her wrist. "It's nothing, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucian studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then, before she could retreat into the shadows again, he murmured words that changed the course of her life. "Come to me tonight." That night beneath the blood moon she did. And nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 2. Secrets Beneath the Moon. The night after the royal ball felt like a dream. Aria wasn't sure she wanted to wake from. She told herself it was just one night. One moment of weakness beneath the blood moon's spell. One reckless mistake between an omega who didn't belong and a king who ruled the world she lived in. But even as she tried to convince herself, deep down she knew something had changed. The weeks that followed were a blur of exhaustion and worry. She threw herself into her work in the palace kitchens, keeping her head down, praying no one would notice the shadows under her eyes, or the way she often pressed a trembling hand to her stomach when she thought no one was watching. But soon, she couldn't ignore it anymore. The mist moon cycles, the constant nausea, the faint, steady heartbeat she swore she could almost hear beneath her own. Aria's breath had caught in her throat the day she realized the truth. She was standing by the palace well when the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her hands went cold, her knees weak. She was pregnant, with his child. The Alpha King's heir. Fear swallowed her whole. She knew what would happen if anyone found out. Royal heirs weren't born in secret, least of all from omegas. Every mating, every child of the Alpha King was a matter of politics, power, and law. A weak, low-ranking servant like her carrying his pup? It could start a war, and if the rival packs didn't kill her first, the king himself might, once he learned how she had dared keep this from him. So she hid it. For weeks, she wore looser dresses and worked in silence, avoiding his gaze whenever the Alpha King passed through the corridors. It wasn't hard. Lucian was too busy dealing with border raids and rebel attacks to notice a trembling little omega serving wine at the edges of council meetings. But fate, as always, had other plans. Because Lucian Blackthorn was a predator. And predators always sensed when something was off. It started with the way his eyes followed her when he thought she didn't notice. The slight narrowing of his gaze when she ducked her head and scurried away. The faint tension in his shoulders whenever her scent drifted close. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the palace walls, Aria carried a tray of food into the war council chamber. She moved quietly, setting down the platters of roasted meat and bread before the map-strewn table where Lucian and his generals spoke in low, urgent voices. She kept her eyes down, heart hammering as she turned to leave. "Stop." The single word froze her mid-step. Aria swallowed hard, turning slowly to find the Alpha King watching her. His golden eyes burned brighter than the torches on the walls. "Come here," he said softly. But there was no room for disobedience in his tone. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her closer until she stood within arm's reach of him. She could feel the heat of his body, the power radiating from him like a storm barely contained. Lucian leaned back in his chair, studying her with a predator's patience. "You've been avoiding me," he said at last, his voice smooth but dangerous, like velvet over a blade. Aria's throat went dry. I've been busy, Your Majesty." A flicker of something dark and primal flashed in his eyes. His gaze dipped briefly, too briefly, toward her midsection, before returning to her face. For one terrible moment she thought he knew, but he only said, "Busy running from me?" The heat in his voice made her pulse race. She couldn't look at him, couldn't breathe under the weight of that golden stare. "No, Your Majesty," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her trembling nerves. Lucian tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he intended to solve. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned closer, his next words brushing against her skin like a caress and a threat all at once. "Then why," he murmured, "do you smell like fear every time I'm near?" Chapter 3. The Alpha King's discovery. Lucian Blackthorn had learned long ago that fear was the most honest emotion a wolf could show. Soldiers could fake courage, rivals could mask their hatred, even allies could smile while hiding betrayal. But fear? Fear couldn't be concealed, and the little Omega before him reeked of it. Not the kind of fear born from punishment. No, this was something else, something deeper. It clung to her like a second skin. Lucian rose slowly from his chair, the scrape of wood on marble echoing in the silent council chamber. His generals exchanged wary glances, but wisely said nothing, as the king dismissed them with a single flick of his hand. One by one they filed out until only Lucian and Aria remained. The door shut with a heavy thud. Aria's hands twisted nervously in front of her. Her heart beat so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The Alpha King moved closer, each step measured, deliberate, like a predator cornering prey. "Look at me," he said softly. She didn't want to. Oh, moon goddess, she didn't want to, because she knew that if she looked into those molten gold eyes, she would break. But Lucian's voice carried the weight of command, and Omegas didn't disobey kings. Slowly, she raised her gaze. He searched her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a growl, he asked, "What are you hiding from me, little wolf?" The words made her breath hitch. I'm not hiding anything, Your Majesty," she lied, hating how small and shaky her voice sounded. Lucian's eyes darkened. He stepped closer until the scent of him surrounded her. Pine and storm winds, and something wild beneath the surface. "Don't lie to me." The words were soft, deadly. Aria's chest ached, her secret pressed against her ribs like a living thing, desperate to be heard, desperate to be protected. She didn't want him to know, because once he knew, everything would change. But Lucian was a king, a predator, an alpha whose instincts were sharper than any blade. And he already knew something was wrong. It happened so suddenly she didn't have time to think. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not cruelly, but firmly enough to hold her still. His other hand came to rest against her abdomen before she could flinch away. Aria's heart stopped. Lucian froze. Under his palm, faint but undeniable, was the subtle swell she had tried so desperately to hide. His head lifted slowly, his golden eyes locking on hers. And in them, she saw the moment the truth hit him like a thunderclap. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. Aria's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her whole body trembled as she braced herself for his fury, for his condemnation, for whatever punishment kings like him dealt to Omegas who carried their heirs in secret. But Lucian didn't move. For the first time since she'd met him, the Alpha King looked utterly shaken. "Mine?" he asked at last, his voice rougher now, as though he didn't quite trust himself to speak. Aria closed her eyes. There was no point lying anymore. "Yes," she whispered. Silence. The storm outside the palace raged against the walls, thunder growling like a beast in pain. But inside the chamber, Lucian stood as still as stone, his hand still over hers, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You should have told me." Aria flinched. I thought you'd be angry, that you'd kill you?" His tone sharpened like a blade unsheathed. She said nothing, because wasn't that what kings did? But then, to her shock, Lucian let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Little wolf," he murmured, his hand tightening protectively over hers. "You carry the heir to my throne. The blood of the Alpha King runs in your veins now." His eyes blazed like molten gold. "And I will let no one touch you. Ever." Aria's breath caught as his words sank in. He wasn't angry. He wasn't going to cast her aside. But there was something else in his eyes now. Something dangerous, possessiveness. Outside the council chamber, unseen by either of them, shadows moved in the corridors. Because secrets like this never stayed hidden for long. And already, someone else knew. Chapter 4. A mate bond? Neither wanted. The corridors of the palace hummed with whispers by the next day. Aria could feel it, the way the servants' eyes lingered on her a little. Too long, the way hushed voices cut off when she entered a room. Word spread like wildfire in packs, and though no one dared speak openly yet, she knew the secret would not stay buried forever. The Alpha King had claimed nothing officially, and yet she carried his heir. Lucian hadn't left her side since the moment he learned the truth. It unsettled her. He was a storm she didn't know how to survive. His presence too big, his emotions locked behind the same cold, impenetrable armor he wore like a second skin. And yet now, there was a constant awareness between them, as though the very air shifted when he was near. It was worse because of the bond. Oh, moon goddess. The bond. Aria had heard of it all her life. The invisible thread that formed when a wolf carried an alpha's child. It was primal, unyielding. Something that pulled two souls closer whether they wanted it or not. And she could feel it now. Every time Lucian entered the room, her pulse spiked. Every time his golden eyes lingered on her, her wolf stirred restlessly. Inside her, torn between fear and a longing she didn't want to name. But she was nothing. A weak, low-born Omega who had no place in his world of power and thrones. She couldn't be his queen. She didn't want to be his mate. Did she? Lucian, however, seemed to have made up his mind. "We will make an announcement," he said one evening as they stood in the council chamber, his deep voice echoing off the high walls. Aria flinched. "An announcement?" His golden gaze locked on hers. "You carry the heir to my throne. Do you think I will let you walk these halls as if you are nothing? As if the world will not try to take what is mine?" Heat flushed up her neck. "I'm not mine," he said again, more firmly this time, and the sound of it stole her breath. There was a growl beneath the word, the claim of an alpha staking his right before the entire world. Aria's heart stuttered. She wanted to argue, to tell him she was not some possession to be marked and paraded before his court. But her wolf whined softly inside her at the sound of his voice, traitorous and trembling beneath the power of the bond tying them together. Before she could speak, the doors to the chamber slammed open. A soldier staggered in, blood streaking his armor. "Your Majesty," he gasped, dropping to one knee. "The northern packs. They know about the child." Aria's blood ran cold. Lucian's face turned to stone. "How?" "We don't know, sire. But they ride for the capital. They mean to take the heir before it's born." The air in the room grew thick with danger. Aria's trembling hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, as if she could shield the life inside her from the entire world. Lucian's eyes snapped to her, his expression carved from fury itself. "Pack your things," he ordered, voice low and lethal. "You're leaving the palace tonight." Aria blinked. "What?" His jaw tightened. "They want the heir?" His gaze burned into hers. "Then they will have to go through me first." That night, as the palace prepared for war, Lucian led her to his private quarters for safety. Guards stood outside the doors. Shadows moved along the walls. Somewhere beyond the city, enemy wolves howled in the darkness. Inside, the tension between them coiled tighter with every breath. He stood by the window, watching the storm gather over the horizon, his shoulders rigid beneath his black cloak. "You hate me for this," he said finally, not turning around. Aria startled. "I don't." "You think I want this bond," Lucian murmured, his voice raw now, quieter, as though speaking to himself. "You think I asked for fate to tie me to someone so fragile, someone the court will rip apart the moment they smell weakness." The words stung, but she knew they were true. She was weak, too weak for this world of kings and wars and thrones drenched in blood, and yet, when he finally turned to face her, there was something in his golden eyes she didn't understand. Not anger, not regret, something deeper. "You are mine now," Lucian said softly, "and I will burn this world to the ground before I let them take you from me." Aria's breath caught, because in that moment she didn't know what terrified her more. The enemies gathering outside, the palace walls, or the bond inside her heart that was growing stronger with every beat. Chapter 5: War, Betrayal, and Love. The night the northern packs came for them, the palace was a world of fire and steel. Aria could hear it all from the Alpha King's private quarters, the clash of swords, the roar of wolves shifting, the bone-shaking howls echoing through the stone halls. She pressed her hands over her ears as another explosion rocked the palace gates. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat, in the very air around her. Lucian was out there. He had ordered her to stay hidden with 2 guards outside the door, but the thought of him facing all that fury alone made her stomach twist in terror. He wasn't just the Alpha King anymore. He wasn't just the cold, untouchable ruler of her world. He was the father of her child, and whether she wanted to admit it or not, her heart no longer beat only for herself. Hours earlier, when the palace bells first rang, Lucian had come to her. His armor gleamed dark as midnight, his sword strapped to his back. "You'll stay here," he told her, his voice sharp with command. Aria had shaken her head, panic rising like a tide. "They're here for me, aren't they? For the child? For the heir?" Lucian corrected grimly. "But they won't touch you. Not while I still draw breath." And then, in front of the guards, in front of the entire world if he had to, Lucian had taken her trembling, face in his hands, and said, low and fierce, "They'll have to kill me before they even reach you." Now, as the palace shuddered with another wave of attacks, Aria paced the room like a caged wolf. Her instincts screamed at her to hide, to protect the life inside her at all costs. But something stronger burned in her chest. She couldn't just sit here while he fought for both of them. The door burst open. Aria whirled, expecting Lucian. Instead, one of the palace guards staggered inside, blood running down his face. "They broke through the southern wall," he gasped. "The king's orders are to move you." Before he could finish, a shadow moved behind him. A rival wolf soldier. The guard didn't have time to scream before claws tore through his throat. Aria stumbled back, her breath locking in her chest. The intruder's eyes burned red with bloodlust as he advanced on her, teeth bared. "Little Omega," he sneered. "The king's whore, you'll fetch a fine price when your pack sees what we've brought them." Aria's body trembled, but something inside her snapped. The bond, the child. Lucian's voice in her head, telling her they would have to kill him before they touched her. The soldier lunged. Aria grabbed the dagger from the dead guard's belt and drove it into the rival wolf's chest with a cry that tore her throat raw. He collapsed at her feet, eyes wide in shock as he bled out on the marble floor. Aria stood frozen, chest heaving, the dagger shaking in her hands. She had killed for the first time in her life, but she wasn't trembling out of fear anymore. Something fierce had awakened inside her. By the time Lucian stormed into the room, blood splattered across his armor. The intruder was dead. He froze, golden eyes landing on the dagger in Aria's trembling hands. "You," his voice was rough, unreadable. "You did this?" Aria swallowed hard, nodding once. For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Then, slowly, he crossed the room and cupped her face in his blood-stained hands. "My little wolf," he murmured, pride and something darker threading through his voice. "You're not as weak as they think, are you?" Aria's breath caught. She didn't know if she wanted to cry or collapse or throw herself into his arms and never let go. Because in that moment, with the battle raging outside and the bond burning hot between them, Lucian Blackthorn finally saw her, not as a servant, not as an Omega, but as his. Chapter 6: The Birth of the Heir. The war did not wait for dawn. By the time the northern packs breached the palace gates, the air was thick with smoke, blood, and the deafening clash of steel on steel. Wolves in both human and beast form tore through the courtyards, their howls carrying through the night like a chorus of rage and death. And in the heart of it all, Aria clutched her swollen belly as pain sliced through her like lightning. The contractions had started hours earlier, at first, sharp but bearable. Now, as she stumbled through the halls with the help of 2 terrified servants, each wave hit harder than the last, dropping her to her knees, stealing her breath. The heir of the Alpha King was coming, and the world outside was burning. Lucian found her near the west wing. his black armor splattered with enemy blood, his golden eyes blazing with a fury that shook her to her core. "Aria." His voice was rough with both battle and fear as he swept her into his arms. "Moon goddess, you're in labor." She clung to him, shaking. I can't." "Not here, Lucian. They'll kill us." "No one," he growled, his arms tightening around her trembling body, "will touch you." "Not while I breathe." The palace healers gathered in a hidden chamber beneath the throne room as Lucian carried her inside, his massive frame filling the doorway like a shield against the world. Guards stationed themselves at every entrance. Outside, the war raged. Inside, the world narrowed to pain, blood, and the sound of her own ragged screams as the contractions tore through her. Aria had never felt so small, so fragile. And yet, as the hours dragged on, she refused to give in. Not when soldiers were dying outside to protect this child. Not when Lucian himself knelt beside her, his hand clasped in hers, his other palm resting over her stomach, as though he could shield both mother and child from fate itself. She had never seen him like this before. The Alpha King who ruled with iron and fire now looked at her with raw, unguarded fear in his eyes every time she cried out in pain. "Breathe, little wolf," he murmured over and over, his forehead pressed to hers between contractions. "Stay with me. You're stronger than this." Aria gritted her teeth, tears streaking her cheeks. "I hate you. For this." Lucian almost laughed. Almost. "You can hate me later. Just bring our heir into this world." The hours blurred together, and then, with one final, desperate cry that echoed through the chamber like the howl of a wounded wolf, it was over. A baby's wail split the air. The healers moved quickly, wrapping the tiny, squirming child in soft cloth before placing him in Aria's trembling arms. She stared down at the small, perfect face, her chest aching with a love so fierce it nearly brought her to her knees. A son, her son, their son. Lucian looked down at them, silent, golden eyes burning as though he had never seen anything so fragile or so sacred. He swallowed hard, voice rough. "He's ours." Aria met his gaze, exhausted but unyielding. "And you'll protect him?" Lucian bent, pressing his lips first to her damp forehead, then to the newborn's tiny head. His voice was a vow carved in stone. "With my life," he said. "With my soul." But even as the promise left his lips, the clash of steel outside grew louder, because the enemy had learned where the heir had been born, and they were coming. Chapter 7. The Last Battle. The cry of the newborn had barely faded when the alarms rose again. Aria's head snapped toward the door, as the clash of swords and the snarl of wolves echoed closer and closer. Her body trembled, still weak from the birth, but her instincts screamed at her to shield the tiny bundle in her arms with her own life if she had to. The enemy was coming for the heir. For her son. Lucian's face darkened as the palace guards burst into the birthing chamber. "They've breached the throne room," one of them panted, his armor dripping blood. "They're headed this way, Your Majesty." Lucian rose slowly, every movement radiating lethal calm. He pulled his sword free from its sheath, the steel singing like death itself. "Stay with her," he told the guards, his voice low and unyielding. "If they reach this room, you'll hold the line until your last breath." "Lucian?" Aria's voice cracked. He turned, golden eyes locking on hers. For the first time since she met him, there was something in his gaze that went beyond power, beyond possession. It was raw, fierce, unshakably devoted. "I will come back," he told her softly. "To you, to him." His gaze fell briefly on the tiny, squirming bundle in her arms. "But they will not leave this palace alive." And with that, the Alpha King was gone, vanishing into the chaos like a storm given flesh. The battle that followed would be sung about for years. Lucian tore through the invading packs like a force of nature, his wolf blazing beneath his skin as he shifted, his massive black form ripping through enemy lines with a fury born of instinct and blood. Every strike of his claws, every snap of his jaws, was fueled by the image of Aria clutching their newborn son in a room just beyond the battlefield, They would not take his mate. They would not take his heir. They would not take his future. But the enemy Alpha came for him in the end. A towering beast of a wolf with silver scars crisscrossing his body, his eyes burning with hatred as he faced Lucian in the center of the throne room. "You've grown weak, Blackthorn," the rival Alpha snarled, tied down by a servant girl and a brat. "Tonight, your line ends." Lucian's growl shook the very walls. "Come," he rumbled, voice like thunder, "and watch your pack die with you." The clash of kings shook the palace to its foundation. It was Aria's cry that broke through the chaos. Lucian froze mid-battle as a scream echoed from the birthing chamber. Aria's scream. The enemy Alpha grinned, lunging for his heart while his attention flickered. But Lucian moved faster. With a roar that split the air, he drove his claws into the enemy's throat, ripping him apart in a spray of blood and fury. The rival Alpha fell, dead before he hit the ground. Lucian didn't spare him another glance as he ran through smoke and fire until he burst back into the chamber where Aria sat, pale and trembling, clutching their child as two enemy wolves lay dead at her feet, slain by the guards before they reached her. Lucian crossed the room in 3 strides. "It's over," he murmured, falling to his knees before her, his blood-stained hands trembling as they cupped her face. "It's over, little wolf. They won't hurt you again." Aria stared at him, at the king covered in the blood of her enemies, and for the first time since she met him, she believed him. The war was done. The palace stood. And the Alpha King had kept his promise. Epilogue. A new dawn for the pack. Weeks later, the palace was rebuilt. The banners of the Blackthorn line flying high above its walls. The packs knelt before Lucian Blackthorn as King of Wolves. But when he took Aria's hand and placed his crown in hers before the entire court, silence fell like snow over the room. "The era of kings is over," Lucian said, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "From this day forward, the queen rules beside me." Aria stood beside him, no longer the trembling servant girl who hid in the shadows. The weak Omega who had once been nothing now carried herself with quiet strength, her son resting peacefully in her arms. She was Luna. She was queen. And she was his mate. Lucian's golden eyes softened as he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Mine," he whispered against her temple. And for the first time since fate had bound them together, Aria smiled. Because she knew he was hers too. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Kindly comment below. If you loved it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more amazing content. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one.